we are on a have you on with us today because you have brought us so much great music, and this show is so much fun, not only to watch, but I imagine you just fun to work on, right?
I mean, it's so fun. It's like, I'm new on this season and it's hard to explain how much more fun it is than a typical project. It's basically I just sort of get to explore and have a great time and I have a lot of freedom and I get to do like research and it sort of like fulfills a lot of things that I enjoy about writing music in general. So yeah, it's super fun. It's like the most fun gig ever.
Yeah. Was there a particular scene or episode or something that stood out to you, just like, oh, I'm always gonna do this one?
Well, there's a great scene where somebody kisses somebody,
Yeah, yeah.
and um, and that scene, like I've written a lot of scenes where somebody kisses somebody, but the thing that was interesting about this particular one was that there it begins diegetic. I don't know if you know that word. Diegetic basically means the music is coming out of the scene. There's something that you see where so there's a violinist and the violinist is playing something. So I had to sort of like make something for the violinist that then becomes this big moment of score. So it's sort of like we sort of like leave the violinist behind and it becomes part of the score and I can then surround it with things that you don't see. And that was a particularly satisfying thing to work on.
When did you first realize that you had the gift? You know, whether they just kind of hit you because you have something great that a lot of people don't have.
Of writing music,
Yeah.
well, I mean, I don't know if I have a gift, but I have like I worked hard. Basically, I was a high school disaster. That's why this is all happening. Because when I was in high school, I was just sort of like socially inept and I wanted to and I knew that, I had some um musical sort of like natural talent that I knew about, but I didn't really know what to do with it and I didn't assume that you could do anything with it. I was born and raised in San Antonio and there was not a lot of my parents were doctors and that was that seemed to be like a likely future scenario. So, but what happened was that because I didn't have a thriving social life, I spent a lot of time sitting at home and playing the piano. And um, and what I would usually do is I had a big family and they would all go out and have gallivant around town and have a great time. And I would stay home and I would listen. I had a radio right here by the piano and I would play the radio and I would learn to play what I heard. And and I would sing along sometimes. And that sort of led to it basically just developed um, my ear for how music works, how a song is put together, what what your left hand does and what your right hand does, and how that it goes with what you're singing. And a piano is a great instrument to do that on because it's sort of like a piano can play everything. It can play. It can be your bass line. It can be your rhythm. It can be percussion, very percussive. So like it's a great instrument to do this on. You're sort of like a one man band. Um, and anyway, so that was my sort of first, that was my entree into music. That was how I began doing stuff with music and sort of realize it sort of takes you from there to there's not a big step between learning how music works and how other people's music works to making your own music. It's not that far because then what would happen is I would just sit at home and I would not have the radio on and let my fingers sort of wander around and see what they could do. So like
Yeah.
anyway, so that's sort of like how it all felt pretty natural. I didn't like I wasn't trying to there was no goal in mind. I was just sort of trying to figure out how these songs worked.
Yeah. Well, now of course people look up to what you're doing and they go, "See, this is what I want to do." But certainly much harder than it looks. What kind of advice do you give to people that want to follow in your footsteps?
Well, it's a great question. It's a difficult. I think it might be harder now than it used to be to get into this line of work, and I don't have a ton of great advice other than it's funny. The advice that people always used to give when I was looking for advice was, be yourself, find your musical voice. And I always used to sort of like not bristle about that, but I didn't feel like that was particularly helpful because I don't know if I had a voice then musically. I do think ultimately that I have found one. Um, but I'm not always using that voice. Sometimes I'm using other voices. So in terms of like getting the job, that's the hard part. Writing music is not so crazy to imagine. A lot of people write music and they don't have a job writing music, and there's nothing wrong with that. That was going to be what I was going to do. I was pre-med in college, and I was a music major at the same time, and I was sort of like equally interested in both things. Um, but it's sort of it, I don't, I wouldn't want to discourage anyone from doing it, but not everybody is so lucky that they get a job.
Yeah.
It's getting a job is the hard part. So like, you know, I, I guess I guess if I had one piece of advice, it would be that you don't really need to hang out with other musicians. You need to hang out with people that are making stuff that you want to work on. So that is really my main piece of advice. People think that they sort of need to know other composers, like if they want to be a composer on a TV show or a movie or whatever, that they need to uh, be in that community. And the community is wonderful and thriving, and there are lots of us making stuff. But those are your competitors. We are buddies, but we are also competitors and trying to get jobs. So the way that you really get a job is by knowing the people who might potentially hire you, directors, producers, and those are writers, people that are making stuff that potentially need music. So when I sort of began trying to get work, those were the people that I was sort of those were I didn't know this at the time, but those were the relationships that wound up changing my career, if it can be called a career.
Yeah. Well, you'll appreciate this. You're from Texas. My co-host is Drew Pearson, one of our great Dallas Cowboys. Caught the Hail Mary, went in the Hall of Fame. He wanted me to make sure I asked you your Hail Mary moment, that moment in your life and career where you just had to go for it and it worked out for you. What do you suppose that was for you?
Well, that's interesting. There was, um, I had a, basically, uh, I had a mentor, and I was an assistant to a composer, and I asked him at some point after I had done a lot of stuff sort of on my own, I basically like asked him if I could work with him in a more sort of like co-writing capacity. I guess that was somewhat of a Hail Mary
Yeah.
because it was if he hadn't said yes, nothing would have been different. I would have been exactly where I was. But because he said yes, and because I asked the question, um, I got opportunities that I would not have otherwise had. And ultimately, those led to me having my own career as a composer. So without his uh, sort of shepherding me and really he was a mentor in like every way. He sort of showed me how to how this whole business kind of works in terms of relating to the people that are asking you to make things and like how you deal with them and how you actually just sort of like logistically make that much music every week. Um, and make it sound good and make it be appropriate. Those are the things I learned from him, and without sort of asking if he would ascend. I mean, I wasn't asking him to be my mentor. I was like, give me a gig, like throw me a bone, and he said yes. So like, I guess that was a Hail Mary.
That sure was, yeah. And part of this is, as creative types are often notoriously hard on ourselves, but is there something that you keep in mind that keeps you on the right path always?
Um, Something that keeps me on the right path. I do ultimately, I'm sort of going backward to the beginning of when I was writing music in a sort of more pure uh, way. I'm always trying to sort of like find, not everybody is like this, but I like for things to be as I'm trying to be inspired every time. Not okay, not every time. Sometimes you have to do something that's very specific. Like you have to write a disco thing that sounds like this, whatever. This is just like a random example. But when you're being asked to create a theme for a character that's based on some kind of particular character or that character's situations or some kind of emotional scenario, like those, I try to go back in time to when I was first writing music and how that felt and how um and to sort of dig deep and find inspiration and not sort of settle for what comes out of my fingers naturally, which is
Hmm.
sort of something that I was taught actually in college. I had a class with a guy named um, George Crumb, who's a very famous, he was a very famous 20th century composer. And the main thing I learned from him was like, don't let your fingers write the music. Like the music's in here, not in here.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting. And I do try to, this is like my default. I can put these
Yeah.
down. It's going to be music. But when I want it to be really something special, I try to use this.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, what is it about this particular show that maybe inspired you or made you feel like, you have your choice of things to do? Like, why this one?
Well, first of all, let's be very clear. Uh, you know, I I get opportunities sometimes,
Yeah.
and other times I seek opportunities. This particular thing, I had done another show for Darren Star called Uncoupled, and we had a great time on that show also. And um, so we have a good working relationship, and he gives me a lot of freedom. So when Darren Star comes knocking, I am going to answer the door.
Yes.
I don't care what it is. Like if he suddenly goes into some other line of work, I'm gonna say yes. So anyway, so like, but or and Emily in Paris is a huge show. It's like a great
Yeah,
opportunity. Who would say what kind of person would say no to that? You got to be crazy.
that's true. Well, I knew you're always working on a bunch of things. What do you have coming up next for us?
Well, uh, I am working on something with my band, The Rescues,
Yes.
which um, and we're working on, I think I can actually say this because it's out in the universe. We are working on the Lost Boys musical.
Yes. I love that.
So that's a big project, and we are
Hmm.
working on it. The schedule of it is essentially we're about a year away from being in pretty serious rehearsals. And then the idea is to be in previews on Broadway in October of 2025, which sounds like it's a long way away. It's really not very long way away at all, because by then we will have a cast and like scenery and like stuff that does not exist yet. So that's a major project.
Hmm.
Um, and it's something that sort of like took us all by surprise a little bit when it started a couple of years ago. And has really changed our lives already without it even existing yet, really. So that's the main other thing I'm working on. I have a lot of very small projects going on, or relative to that, they're very small.
Yeah.
Everything is small relative to that. So like, anyway, and it continues to be a lot of work. That musical is going to be, we've written a lot of songs. There are hopefully not many more to write, but we are still writing new material. There's going to be other stuff to do besides just the writing of the songs. There's all kinds of other processes that have to happen. There's also underscore
Yeah.
that will have to happen. So, and that will be sometime later next year. Anyway, that is my other massive project. It's a bigger project than, and very different schedule. Like I'm not, Emily in Paris is like when it's happening, it's like every week cranking it out.
Yeah.
A lot of music in a short amount of time. Fully produced, finished, done, shipped on the soundtrack, on the Netflix, in the world. And this is more like we're writing we're not responsible for the script. There's book writers, but the songs evolve over time. They don't have to be fully like made yet. We're just talking about like words and music still.
Yeah.
We are making demos of them, so they gradually are taking more of like a produced sound, but it's a longer process.
Yeah.
So every week we might be working on a thing, but it's not like we're making tons of new music every week.
Yes, but will you grow out the Kiefer mullet in honor of this?
Great question. This is a great question, and it's going to be on everybody's agenda starting about a year from now. What are we going to look like for the premiere? It's a lot to think about.
Well, that movie was very special to me when I was younger, and I'm sure you as well. So it's got to be an exciting thing.
I mean, I never saw it.
Really?
This is another thing. This fell in the band is called The Rescues. The
Yes.
Rescues are playing a show. These guys came up to us at the end of the show and they were like, "Hey, will you do the music for this musical?" It just fell into our laps.
Wow.
So I was like, well, I guess I got to watch the movie. I had never seen it. My wife has seen it. She's a huge fan. Adrian from The Rescues had seen it.
Yeah.
Huge fan. Adrian was like, "We were born to make this musical."
Yeah.
And I had to watch it, and I was like sort of fascinated by it in many ways. It's a weird movie.
Yeah, it really is.
It's not what you expect. And when you think of it now, it's like you sort of think of like, vampires but when you watch it, there's a lot of very unusual aspects to that movie. Like the score itself is unusual. There's just like some like
The
80s
oily
weirdness.
man with the saxophone and that
Yeah,
whole thing.
like there's like strange stuff that goes on in that movie.
That's right.
So anyways, but it has obviously grown a special place in my heart.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, then last thing, are we going to get to see your band play anytime soon, or is there any other music
The
coming
band
up?
is playing September 12th and 13th
Good.
in LA
Good.
at the Hotel Cafe. So we are playing. We just were in North Carolina at NC State. That was really fun. The band seems to be having a little bit of like we're playing a little more than we used to.
Yeah.
We've been in sort of hibernation trying to make this musical, and
Yeah.
as we are getting closer to the finish line of the musical, we're playing a little bit more. And I hope that we get to play a lot more. I hope that when the musical is out in the world, that we get other chances to play not just the music from the musical, but to play our own stuff outside the musical.
That's amazing. Well, we're really, really looking forward to that, and we're so happy for you for doing this season, and can't wait to see what you do next. And thank you for giving us years of great music so far.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you. Okay,
All right.
bye.